There are artists who leave this world in tragedy, leaving behind loud headlines and stories that were never fully closed. Others collapse right under the spotlight, where every moment is recorded, analyzed, and retold over and over again. But Syd Barrett disappeared in a different way. There was no shocking death, no scandal, no final moment that people could point to and say, "That's when everything ended." It was simply that, at some point, he stopped appearing. And the strange thing is, the world didn't notice immediately. He had once been the one who laid the foundation for Pink Floyd, not just a member, but the center of its earliest years. His music was unlike anything else at the time. It was both innocent and surreal, both like a game of imagination and like a doorway opening into spaces no one had ever stepped into. For a very brief moment in history, he didn't just create music, he created a world. But then the story did not end with a fall. It did not shatter into pieces before the public eye. It did not build toward a climax for people to remember. It simply quieted down. No announcement, no explanation, no clear goodbye. A founder stepping away from what he himself created, an artist stepping away from music, a name slowly fading from the light that once shone upon it. And from that silence, a question began to form. Not what destroyed him, but what made him no longer want to continue. Because sometimes disappearance does not begin with tragedy. It begins with a very small decision and a very quiet silence. Before there were stage lights, before the strange sounds began to echo from the London Underground, Syd Barrett was simply a child growing up in Cambridge, a quiet city where life moved more slowly and thoughts seemed to have more space to develop. He was born in 1946 into a middle-class family with a strong academic atmosphere. His father was a doctor, a figure representing reason, structure, a world that could be understood and controlled. But perhaps within that very environment, something opposite was also quietly forming, a tendency not to be defined. Losing his father at a young age was not just a personal event. It created a space, not loud, but deep enough to alter the way a person sees the world. Not in an obviously tragic direction, but as a very subtle shift in the way reality is perceived. Before music became his primary language, Syd was drawn to painting. He painted not as a secondary hobby, but as a way to understand the world around him. Colors, shapes, space, all seemed to attract him more than the traditional structures of music at the time. When music entered his life, it did not replace painting. It merged with it. His influences did not come from a single source. Literature, visual art, folk, blues, all blended together, without a clear order. And that very lack of order became its own kind of logic, a way of thinking that was non-linear, that required no explanation, yet still held meaning for the one creating it. Those around him began to notice the difference. Not a clear rebellion, but a very slight misalignment. Syd did not resist the mold. He simply did not belong to it. He created, but did not try to impress. He was different, but did not try to separate himself. He simply existed in his own way. And that is what made him so difficult to grasp. Because Syd Barrett, from the very beginning, was never just a musician. He was an artist, in a much broader sense. When leaving Cambridge for London, Syd Barrett did not just carry a guitar with him. He carried a way of seeing the world, vague, non-linear, and almost impossible to explain through conventional logic. There, he met Roger Waters, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright. People who were also searching for something newer than the rigid structures of rock at the time. They did not just want to play music, they wanted to experiment. And from that, Pink Floyd was formed. The band's name was not a commercial choice. It was assembled from two blues artists, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council, like a connection between the past and something entirely undefined. But what truly made the band different was not in the name. It was in the way they existed within the musical space of the London Underground. At places like the UFO Club, music was no longer the only center. Light, color, movement, everything blended together, forming an experience. The audience did not just listen. They were drawn into a state where the boundary between sound and sensation gradually blurred. And at the center of all of it was Syd Barrett. He did not just play guitar. He used it as a tool to paint sound. The melodies did not follow familiar paths. The riffs were not meant to impress technically. They were like brush strokes, spontaneous, sometimes distorted, but always carrying a very distinct feeling. His lyrics were the same. They did not tell stories in the usual way. They felt like fragments of memory, childlike images, words that were both innocent and surreal. A world where logic was no longer the most important element, but feeling was. In 1967, the album The Piper at the Gates of Dawn was released. It was not just a debut album, it was a statement, a sonic world where anything could happen, where rock was no longer confined within its own structures, where an individual imagination could become a collective experience. In that moment, Syd Barrett was not just a member of the band. He was its creative soul. And if Pink Floyd would later become one of the greatest bands in history, then that early period, brief but radiant, would always carry the imprint of someone who had seen what others had not yet understood. An architect of the psychedelic world. Before he himself began to drift away from it, the change did not come as a shock. There was no specific day when everything suddenly collapsed. No clear moment to look back on and say, that's when it all began. It came slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it became impossible to ignore. Within the psychedelic space of London at the time, where sound, light, and experience blended into one, everything existed in a state of openness. Boundaries were blurred, perceptions were pushed beyond the ordinary, and at the center of that world, Syd Barrett began to change. Not in a way that was easy to define, just different. On stage, he would sometimes forget the lyrics. There were moments when he stood still, unresponsive, as if the music was happening somewhere he no longer fully belonged to. His gaze did not meet the audience, and nor did it turn toward the band. It seemed to rest on an undefined space. It wasn't always like that. And that is what made everything even harder to grasp. There were nights when he still played as before, creative, unpredictable, full of life. But then, immediately after, came moments no one could anticipate. As if between two versions of the same person, there was no clear boundary. For a band, that instability was not just a personal issue. It became a question of survival. Performances grew increasingly difficult to control. Recording sessions no longer followed any plan. Working together, once the foundation, began to feel fragile. The tension did not erupt. It accumulated, quietly but persistently. In an effort to keep everything from falling apart, David Gilmour was brought in. At first, she's only to support, to fill the gaps when Syd could not continue. A temporary solution, a way to maintain balance. But temporary solutions sometimes do not remain temporary. The line between support and replacement gradually disappeared. And then, the band found itself facing a choice no one truly wanted to confront. Keep Syd, the one who had created their original soul, or continue as a band that could exist in the real world. There was no right answer, only one thing that became clearer over time. The person who once shaped the sound of Pink Floyd was slowly drifting away from that very sound. There was no official farewell, no press conference, no statement, no closing moment for people to name. In 1968, Syd Barrett left Pink Floyd, or more precisely, he was no longer part of it. That decision did not come from a single event. It was the result of many things that could no longer coexist. And then, one day, the band simply continued without him. No clear explanation, only an absence. What is notable is not that Syd left, but how he left. No resistance, no argument, no attempt to hold on to his place. He did not leave the band through a rupture. He slipped out of it, almost silently. But the story did not end there. A few years later, he returned to the studio. Not to return to the spotlight, but as if to record what still remained within him. 2 solo albums were released, The Madcap Laughs and Barrett. And what is remarkable is that those who had once gone through the early years with him, David Gilmour and Roger Waters, were the very ones who helped complete these recordings, not as an effort to restore him, but more like an act of acknowledgement. The recordings were unstable. The rhythms sometimes drifted away from familiar structures. The vocals at times seemed detached from the songs themselves. All of it created a sense of fragmentation, as if the pieces of a world were no longer fully connected. But within those gaps, something still remained. A form of creativity no longer controlled, yet not entirely gone. Melodies still appeared. Images still surfaced in the lyrics. Strange, distorted, yet carrying an unmistakable imprint. This was not a comeback, not an attempt to reclaim a place. It was what remained when an inner world began to dissolve, but had not yet completely disappeared. And after that, there was no clear continuation, only a gradual silence. There was no clear ending moment, no final performance remembered as a full stop, no last recording for the audience to hold on to as a farewell. With Syd Barrett, nothing truly ended. It simply, gradually stopped. After the solo recordings in the early 1970s, he still appeared a few more times. Scattered performances, brief moments, not enough to form a return. And then, even those rare appearances disappeared. No announcement, no explanation, just no longer there. He stopped performing, but never declared that he would stop. He stopped recording, but never said that he was finished. No official decision was ever presented to the public. No clear boundary between still doing and already stopped. Only a space that kept widening. What is notable is, he did not try to come back. There were no attempts at re-emergence, no new projects in development, no sign of a plan to return to the music industry. In a world where artists often fight to hold on to their place, where every disappearance is followed by a return, Syd's silence became something unusual. He did not leave to prepare for a new chapter. He left without opening the next one. And precisely because there was no statement, no farewell, no confirmed ending. His withdrawal did not resemble an event. It felt like a process. Slow, quiet, impossible to pinpoint exactly when. At some point, people realized he was no longer there. Not because he had said, "I'm stopping," but because he simply did not continue. And in that way, Syd Barrett became one of the rare cases in rock history. An artist who did not leave music through a rupture, but through a silence that lasted until it became permanent. After all the sound, the light, and the spaces that once seemed to open endlessly, Syd Barrett returned to Cambridge, not as someone coming back from failure, nor as a legend seeking his past again, simply returning home. He lived with his family in a space completely separate from London, the place that had once been the center of everything. No more stages, no more studios, no more nights stretching on under psychedelic lights. Only ordinary days remained. He painted, not for exhibition, not to prove anything. Just painting, like a habit, like a way to keep the inner world within him continuing to exist in another form. He gardened, he walked, simple, repetitive actions, almost insignificant, yet they formed the entirety of his rhythm of life. And throughout all those years, he almost never appeared in public. No interviews, no reflections, no retelling of his own story. He rejected fame, not through words, but through absolute silence. Opportunities for reunion were passed over. Invitations to return went unanswered. Even his own legacy, he made no attempt to exploit or shape. While the outside world continued to speak about him, continued to build his image as an icon, he himself chose to stand outside of all of it, not opposing, but not participating. What makes this story different is that it does not carry the color of a clear tragedy. There was no public self-destruction, no familiar narrative of hitting rock bottom. There was only a person, gradually withdrawing from every definition the world had once placed upon him. An artist who once created limitless sonic spaces, choosing instead to live within a very small, very quiet space. And perhaps it was there that he found another kind of freedom. Not the freedom of creating before an audience, but the freedom of not having to continue. There are artists who leave behind a legacy through quantity, through albums, tours, years of constant presence before the public. But Syd Barrett left behind something else, not through what he continued to do, but through what he chose to leave behind. His influence did not stop at the early period of Pink Floyd. It extended further into the very way people think about music. Psychedelic rock, alternative, experimental, all carry within them a part of the spirit he once opened. Artists like David Bowie, Radiohead, and many later indie generations were not only influenced by Syd's sound, but by the way he approached art. An approach that did not need to follow structure, did not need clear explanation, yet still created a world that could be felt. But perhaps the place where his legacy is most clearly present is precisely where he once stepped away. In 1975, Pink Floyd released the album Wish You Were Here, a direct tribute to Syd. Not a loud acknowledgement, but a sense of longing that runs throughout the album. A presence without form, yet impossible to ignore. He was no longer there, but he never truly disappeared. In the story of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett became a paradox, an absence that is always present, a name that no longer appears, yet never left. He is not remembered as an artist with a long career, nor as a legend built over decades. He is remembered as a moment, brief, elusive, yet enough to alter the direction of everything that followed. And because of that, Syd Barrett's legacy does not lie in the quantity of what he left behind. It lies in the influence and in the space he left behind. A space that no one could truly fill. A shadow, always there, even long after the lights have gone out. Syd Barrett's story does not end in the way we are used to. There is no fall to explain everything. No clear failure for people to label. No moment where he lost. Because perhaps he was never playing by the same rules. He was not defeated by the industry. Not replaced by a new generation. Not consumed by his own fame. He simply left. And that is precisely what makes this story harder to understand, but also more real. We are used to seeing disappearance as a consequence. Something must happen. A shock, a mistake, a collapse, to explain why an artist is no longer there. But Syd Barrett suggests another possibility, that sometimes nothing happens at all. Just a person, no longer wanting to continue. Not because they cannot, but because they no longer find it necessary. And when that happens, they do not need to destroy themselves to leave. They do not need an explanation to be accepted. They do not need an ending large enough to be remembered. They only need silence. To the world, that silence may look like a void, something lost, a story unfinished. But to the one who leaves, it may instead be another kind of completion. Not the end of a journey, but the act of stopping, exactly when they choose. And perhaps that is what makes Syd Barrett different. Not because of what he created, but because of how he chose to stop. Because sometimes disappearance is not a loss. It is a choice, a founder, a voice that once shaped an entire band. And then, a person who chose to live outside every definition of success the world had ever placed upon him. Syd Barrett's story does not close with a climax, for it does not need a grand ending to carry meaning. Because sometimes, what remains is not in what is seen, but in what has quietly withdrawn. A presence once so powerful, becoming a space no one can replace. And it is that space that continues to be remembered. If you are drawn to the quiet stories behind legendary names, subscribe to Icons and Legacies, where we explore not just fame, but what remains after it fades.